So good afternoon. We'll get going in just a couple of minutes. And today we're going to cover, go back more into a little bit more financial analysis tools and cover cost, volume, profit analysis and some sensitivity analysis. And so this is really to help you as you're starting to compare among different options to think about how, as you change your prices, your volume of sales or cost of production, how your profit will change. And also what we'll talk about today a little bit is what influence fixed costs versus variable costs have on how profitability can change over a range of different volumes that you sell. We'll also touch on sensitivity analysis, so to help you think about as you're doing, as you're a manager and as you're thinking about different options, understanding how what the range is likely to be for you to meet your targeted sales goals and your at least so you can cover your costs. So with that, my name is Liz Higgins again, and I'm an extension specialist with the Eastern New York Commercial Horde team. And the first thing I want to make sure that we're all clear on is variable costs and fixed costs. And I was actually giving this a lot of thought the other day because, when we're talking about farm business management, a lot of times we talk about, we use terms, and a lot of times we use terms, the same term differently in different situations. And, variable costs are often sort of defined as costs of production, and fixed costs tend to be sort of put in the overhead category when you're doing financial budgeting. But it's also, I think, but these are terms that also can be used differently, especially when we're talking about really doing management level analysis of our finances. And they can be thought of a little bit more broadly. And a variable cost is a cost that will change in proportion to the volume of products produced. And so as and it won't necessarily be a 1-to-1 ratio, but it's a proportionate change. And so there is this variation as you create more product, you have more, there's a relationship with the costs. Whereas fixed costs don't change in proportion to the volume produced. And that's usually, they usually don't change for a defined period of time. And the important thing to understand with fixed costs in particular is there really is this temporal, this time, sort of information sort of embedded in the fixed cost definition because I'm, as I said, I'm an economist, I'm not an accountant, but over time, like there are no fixed costs. You can, all costs are variable with enough time. It's just in a very short period of time, more costs tend to be fixed because we have less flexibility about changing the costs or the volume of costs. And you can even think about this, when you are ordering, sort of seeds and stuff, right? Like, in the short run, you may have to buy, the cost may be fixed in the sense that you are buying, in some level of volume, even that's not necessarily proportionate to what you're going to be planting. But over time, those costs are more variable. I mean, you would adjust up and down the costs that you pay. So, but understanding the difference between variable and fixed costs is very important for doing this cost volume profit analysis. You use cost profit analysis to study the behavior and relationship among these elements as changes occur in the number of units sold and the selling price. Because if you have a lot of fixed costs, then you need there's more of a you have this lump of costs, and I think it's fairly easy to understand that you have this lump of costs that you have to sell a certain volume of in order to just even get over the hump of that fixed cost. Whereas if it's a variable cost, it does, if you sell none, you don't have any cost. If you sell two, you only have the cost for those two, but you don't have this like startup cost, this lump of cost that you have to sell in order to recoup that larger upfront cost too. So yesterday we talked about having this 5-step process for sort of evaluating a management decision. So I thought I would sort of put this into the framework of that. So the first step would be to identify a problem. And so to go through a cost volume profit analysis, so let's start with the problem. Like, should I rent a booth at a food marketing show to sell my hard cider? Should I do this? And the questions that you might have is like, what can I charge there? How many units am I likely to sell? And these are things that you'd want to, as a manager, start to think about. Having, get some more information on before you make this determination. So the next step is, to obtain information. You find out that the show has over 100,000 attendees. They're high income participants. You get some good feedback about sales from prior year people who've gone to this show in other years, that it's definitely worth doing. So you obtain information. And then you make predictions. And this is where, your information and your knowledge as a manager comes in, that you think that you can sell 5,000 bottles of cider at $30 each, maybe up to 10,000, because you're usually, you operate on your sort of past information. You're usually able to sell bottles to about 10% of the people who come to your tasting room. You think that, well, if that demographic might be similar to the people who are at this food show. So, if there's 100,000 people that are likely to be there, if you can reach 10% of them, that would be $10,000, that would be 10,000 sales. So that's a prediction that you make. And then you need to make a decision. Do you do this or not? And that's where, the cost volume profit analysis can be a tool that you can use. So the first thing you need to do is define which expenses are fixed and which expenses would be variable for this endeavor. So the booth rental is a fixed cost. You have to pay it regardless of whether you sell 1 bottle of cider or 1 million bottles of cider. The labor for the show in this case would be fixed. You figure it's $500 because you have to have a certain number of people there for a certain amount of time, and that's part of your contract. And so it's not negotiable. So that would be fixed for this. Travel to get to the show would be a fixed cost. You would have to pay it whether you sell any cider or, millions of dollars of cider or whatever. But the cost of the bottles of cider that you've produced is variable, right? Because, if you don't sell them, you're going to bring them home. So, so that cost is, would depend on the number that you sell. You're bringing these to market, they're $10 each. But if you don't sell any, you'd still have them and you just sell them somewhere else. And the cost of a bag, to put each bottle of cider in would be 5 cents, and that's a variable cost because any bags you don't use, you still have them and that you don't lose that money. So, now you've decided which are your fixed costs and which are your variable costs. And this is a relatively, I've tried to make this a relatively simple example. So then you want to calculate the contribution margin, and that's the total revenue that you would gain minus the total variable costs. So only the variable costs, not the fixed costs. And then you would calculate the operating income, which would be the contribution margin, right? So that's the total revenue minus variable costs, and then minus the fixed costs. So let's do that. So for 1 bottle sold, your revenue is $30. Your variable costs would be $10.05. So your contribution margin is $19.95. And then you've got $22,000 in fixed costs. So you're at negative $22,480 for your operating income. And that would be your profit for this endeavor. At 1,000 bottles, your revenue, it's $30 a bottle. That's $30,000. Your variable costs would be $10,050, right? Because it's 1,000 times the $10.05. Your contribution margin then is just your variable costs minus your revenue, $19,000, and your fixed costs are still $22,500. You see, these fixed costs don't change. they're just fixed. So you're still at negative 2,550. And as you go up, you can see as you sell more, once you get over that cost of the fixed costs, every bottle you sell at that point contributes more to your overall operating income. So another ratio that sometimes people use, the contribution margin ratio. So how much does every dollar of revenue, so it's the contribution of every dollar of revenue you earn, you earn 67 cents. And so that's a useful tool for calculating how much a change in revenue will change your contribution, will change the contribution margin. But that has nothing to do with the fixed costs, right? That's just looking at how much your variable costs contribute to your contribution margin. But what's I think more relevant for most people would be this idea of break even. Break even is the quantity of output that you need to sell where your total revenue equals your total costs. And that's where your contribution margin, or your, essentially your, your revenue minus your variable costs, is equal to your fixed costs, right? And so, at that point you've earned, you're at zero. That would be your absolute break even. That means you've at least earned enough to cover your initial fixed costs to be there. Anything less than that, you're losing money. And anything more than that, now you're starting to earn some profit, but you have to have enough income coming in from your contribution margin in order to first cover the fixed costs. And so in this case, to calculate break even, you would you'd set your contribution margin equal to fixed costs. And then you can see that your revenue times your contribution, they do this more complicated, you can do this more complicated where you do it by contribution margin ratio. But, you can see that your revenue is equal to your contribution margin divided by that contribution margin ratio, which would be $33,000 is equal to 22,500 divided by that 0.665, that contribution margin ratio. And those are the sales you need to break even. So 33,000 is what 835 is how much you need to have in revenue to break even. And if you divide that by the $30, what each bottle costs, you need $1,127. I'm sorry, 1,127 bottles. You have to sell that many in order to just break even. So when you do a break even analysis, one of the things you want to know is can you actually hit that number, right? Do you think that you feel confident that you'll sell at least 1,127 bottles? If you really didn't feel confident that you could do that at this event, or you were nervous about that, then you would say, well, given the amount of fixed costs I have to spend to go to this event, I'm not sure that this is worth doing. And so the other way to think about it is what level of income do you want to achieve? And that would be your target operating income is the income that you want to achieve by being at the event. And that would be your, to calculate, to know, so what you want to know is how many bottles do I need to sell in order to achieve my target operating income? So I want to earn, $100,000 if I go to this event. That's my goal. So how many bottles do I need to sell in order to actually earn $100,000? Do I think I can do that? So you would take that your target operating income that you want to get, and then you would add your fixed costs to that. So it would be 100,000 plus 22,500. And then you would divide that by the contribution margin, and that would be 6,140 bottles. So in order to earn $100,000, I would have to sell in this case 6,140 bottles. And and I should say that when you're calculating the target operating income, it's always that variable cost per unit, that you are looking at. So it would be the $19.95, and that would be regardless of whatever you said the target operating income. So if I set my target operating income to $50,000 to calculate the number of bottles, it would be the 22,500, that fixed cost, plus $50,000 divided by the 1995. If I wanted to set my target operating income to $1 million, it would be $1 million plus the fixed cost, the $22,500 divided by the 1995. In each of those cases, that would tell me how many bottles of cider at this event, at $30 a bottle, I would need to sell in order to earn that income that I want to earn. And so that's, when you're doing modeling, that's, of like whether or not something, like what you would need to do in order to get a certain income. This is a way for you to be able to sort of say, well, does this seem like this is something that I could do based on, what I've seen in the past or my experience in selling in the past. And you might look at that number like I'd have to sell 20,000 bottles, and you're like, I'm not really confident like that I can sell 20,000 bottles at an event like this. Or it might be I have to sell like 10 bottles, and you're like, oh yeah, that would be no problem. So it gives you a sense of being able to do this calculation, being able to figure out what level of volume you need to sell in order to hit your target income. It can be really powerful, and you can work the other way. Obviously these are all formulas. So if you knew that you could sell 5,000 bottles, you could actually put an X in where the 100,000 is, and solve for that too. It's just an algebra problem. So, the key thing though is to conduct this cost volume profit analysis, you really need to be able to distinguish variable from fixed costs. And I know I've already touched on that, but I just want to reiterate that because it's really important that, because the key with the cost volume profit analysis is you're trying to generate enough income in order to both first cover your fixed costs and then to earn a profit after that. So, the shorter the horizon, the more costs are going to be fixed. Some industries have more fixed costs than others. Orchards have a lot of fixed costs, a lot of capital costs that you need to, that you need to have revenue coming in to like cover those costs. Labor is one of those that can be like fixed or variable depending on the time horizon or the situation. In this example, it's fixed because the time period is short. But if rather than a 3-day show, it was a 1-year market, you would be more able to adjust the labor depending on the sales that you have. So that might not be a fixed cost. In that case, it might be a variable cost or more of a variable cost. The key thing is that this can help you choose among alternatives. So let's use an example. If you want to have decide whether you should sell cider in single bottles or cider in 6-packs at the event. And cider in 6-packs adds $2 to variable costs, but it does seem to sell better. So you'd want to know how many more 6-packs would I need to sell than bottles in order to achieve a target operating income of $100,000 still. So I still want to get 100,000. I think that 6-packs will sell better. It's the same, otherwise I can sell them for $30. But they do have a little bit higher variable cost. How much, how many more would I need to sell in order to cover that cost? So it's the same, it's the same problem again, that you add the target revenue that you want to get plus the fixed costs, and that's 122,500. And then in each case, you would divide that by your that contribution margin, right? So the contribution margin for a bottle, which we did before, was $19.95 because it's the revenue minus the variable cost. For a 6-pack, it would be $18 instead. So so I would have to sell 6,140 bottles in order to make my revenue, my operating income of 100,000. I'd have to sell 6,805 6-packs, I should have said there, or 11% more in order to get the same amount of target operating income. So then I'd ask myself, well, do I think that that's achievable? And I say, yeah, I think that actually these would be more convenient for me to bring. And, I have found that they do sell better. I think that people think that they're getting a better deal or whatever with six packs. Um, another alternative could be, what happens if I reduce my prices? Right? So how many more bottles would I need to sell at $25 compared to 30 to achieve my target operating income? At $20 $25 a bottle, how many would I then need to sell to even break even? So it's the same, you've got your target operating income of $100,000. That's your goal, plus the fixed costs, so you have the 122,500. It's the same again, the 122,000 divided by 1995, that contribution margin for bottles at $30 is 6,140 bottles to sell. If I lower the price to $25 a bottle, that contribution margin is now $14.95. So I divide the 122,500 divided by 14.95. I now have to sell 8,194 bottles, or 33% more, at $25 a bottle to have the same operating income at the end. And then to break even, I would have to sell 1,505 to break even, compared to the 1,127 at 30. And this is actually an easier break even formula too. So you just basically take the fixed cost divided by the contribution margin, and that would tell you the volume that you would need to sell in order to break even. And so I might say to myself, well, do I think that I'm going to have that higher level of sales? Does that make sense? Do I think that if I lower the price, that I'm actually going to see that many more sales? Do I think that people will respond that strongly to a drop in the prices? And so one of the things you have to, think about when you're dropping prices, also, or changing prices, is how will your customers respond to changes? We have what we call price elasticity of demand, and that is what percentage change in quantity is depending on, divided by the percentage change in price. And so, there are some customers that, as price changes, they demand, they don't change how much they demand that much. So inelastic people, like they're more price insensitive. They pretty much buy what they buy. Whereas people who are price elastic, as price changes, the quantity demanded changes more. So if I think that my buyers are not that price sensitive, I might not think I would get that many more sales by dropping the price. They're not that responsive. On the other hand, if I have buyers who are very price sensitive, that if I drop the price down to down to $25, I'll sell a lot more, I might be likely to to make that drop. So that's one of those things that you'd have to have a sense of how your buyers in the market are likely to respond to prices. So in this example here, if at $5, if a price is $5, and this customer A buys 5, the blue guy is A. So at $5 he would buy 5, and so I would earn $25. And customer B over here buys 2, and so I earn $10. So if I drop the price down to $3 a unit, customer A will now buy 9. So I'm actually earning more. I get $27 if I drop the price, because he will buy more. But customer B, if I drop the price down to $3, he now buys 3. He doesn't really change how many he buys that much. So I only make $9. So I'm actually making less by dropping that price. And so it could be that, with the cider people, if I drop it from 25 to, 30 to 25, that might, if they're very price elastic, like customer A here, that change in sales may totally make the difference. And I may end up making more. But if they're more like customer B over here, that drop in price could end up losing me money because they don't actually respond with that quantity change in prices. So, there's more things to consider. And this is more information you'd have to think about and maybe do some testing over time about how people respond to changes in your prices. And that would give you a sense of whether or not, being this person who dropped their prices down to 25 from $30 a bottle, whether you would be likely to see that 33%, more than a 33% response in sales. If you don't think you're going to see more than a 33% response in sales, you're probably going to lose money by, by doing this big of a drop. It's probably not a good thing to do. So the other thing I want to talk about is operating leverage, and that describes, we've touched on this a little bit, the effect that fixed costs have on changes as operating income as changes occur in the units sold. So the degree of operating leverage is the contribution margin, and remember the contribution margin is that revenue minus variable costs divided by your operating income. So farms that have a high proportion of fixed costs, any business that has a high proportion of fixed costs in your cost structure has high operating leverage. And when you have high operating leverage, a small change in sales has a larger change in your operating income. And that, and it goes in either direction. So a small decrease in sales has a proportionately large change in, reduction in your operating income. And that changes, your operating leverage changes at different points along the, units sold. So, so it's not, as you can see, it's not, operating leverage isn't the same at every point, but you can see with like farm A here, you have farm A and you have farm B. And farm A, they sell the same number of units. They, so they earn the same revenue. They have the same variable cost structure. So, so their variable costs are the same. So their contribution margin is the same, but they have very different fixed cost structures. Let's just say, farm A doesn't have as much debt. Maybe they don't have as many, they don't have as much equipment that they're carrying. So for some reason they have lower fixed costs than farm B. So their operating income, from farm A is higher than farm B. And I think that, that's fairly intuitive. But they also, you can see they have different operating leverage because this one has, this higher fixed cost. So let's just say that they sell 5 more units. So farm A, if they sell 5 more units, farm A's, their operating income goes up to $110, and that's a 57% increase. But farm B, that 5 unit more, their income goes up to $100. And you say, well, yeah, that's still less than farm A's. Yeah, but it's a 66% increase. So you can see that the percentage increase in income is higher for B, because they had this increase in sales compared to farm A, because they are, as they sell more, that fixed cost, the effect of having that higher fixed cost matters less. And so as they get to higher and higher levels of units sold, their operating leverage will decline, because this fixed cost as a percentage of their overall costs is a smaller percentage of that overall cost. And so that, it's just sort of a way of sort of understanding that having fixed costs, does have an effect on, on your risk. Your price risk or your unit sold risk. You have more risk if you have a lot of the higher fixed costs, because if the amount of sales that you have isn't where you think that it will be, if it's lower than you expect, that will have a higher proportionately effect on your overall operating income or your profitability. So that's just that is just an effect that fixed costs have. So, so businesses that have higher fixed costs are more concerned, having, changes in the number of units that they sell, is, they want to sell more units, to sort of, you know, to make it so that those fixed costs are have less, have less sort of a drag on their profitability. Whereas a farm that has, lower fixed costs, I mean, they want to sell more units too, but the fixed costs are, have less of an outsized effect, on profitability. And then finally, I just want to touch on sensitivity analysis. A sensitivity analysis is sort of a what if technique that you can use to examine, how an outcome will change, if the original predicted data isn't achieved or your underlying assumption changes. And we've sort of been, sort of talking around sensitivity analysis, with this. But we talk about this idea of having like a margin of safety, right? As you're creating, a budget, as you're thinking about making an investment, you have your budgeted revenues or your actual revenues, and then you have your break even revenues, right? Where, anything less than break even, you're losing money. And so you can have that in revenue, or you can have it in units sold, right? So the margin of safety in units sold would be the quantity that you sell, and then the break even quantity that you need to sell. So earlier on, when we talked about the, orchard, like whether or not you want to go and do the, sales at this trade show, the break even revenue that you needed to make, in order to not actually lose money by going there, was 33,835. And your break even quantity sold, that you need to sell 1,127 bottles at, $30 a bottle, in order to not lose money by being there. So now let's just say, your target revenue, in order to feel like it was worth your time to go, is $150, and your target quantity, like you think you can sell 5,000 bottles. So your margin of safety is going to be like anywhere within that range. You're at least not losing money. And so the larger that range is, obviously the less risk there is. And the smaller that range is, the, more risk you have. So if you think that you, can only sell 2,000 bottles, they're like feasibly, then you've got a much narrower, a much narrower range. Or if your break even quantity, in order to break even was 4,000 bottles to break even, and you think you can sell 5,000 bottles, once again, you're assuming more risk by going, because there's more of a chance that you won't be able to break, you might lose money by being there. So the wider that range is, that margin of safety, the less risk there is, in sort of in undertaking that endeavor. On the other hand, if you're budgeting, some people tend to be more conservative in their budgeting and assume a smaller margin of safety, and some people tend to be more optimistic and assume a larger margin of safety. But so that's where you want to get more data and try to be as realistic as possible, so that you don't end up, in a situation where you are, you are assuming more risk really than you should be assuming. So I think with that, that's what I wanted to cover today. I will, I'm starting to put these, PowerPoints up, so this will be available, to you if you want to go back and look at it. And otherwise I'm also going to be editing them to make them a little bit clearer as I, as I go through the videos and stuff too. Does anybody have any questions about this? I know it's a lot sort of to look at, in a webinar. It's a lot to digest sort of at once. So if you have a question, you can put it in the chat box or in the Q&A. Otherwise, tomorrow we will do net present value and internal rate of return. And after that, I think, the next steps will be I'll have the videos up and edited, and we will have the live in-person opportunities to sort of work through some of these types of scenarios in person later this winter. So if there's no questions, I guess we will be back tomorrow.